I think a well-written essay is first of all interesting to read. I think this is probably a very simple issue, but in fact it's very important to enjoy what you read, and that it's a sort of good presentation of the topic. And probably what I also think should be part of a good essay is that it expresses the author's opinion. That it's not just you repeat or summarize something, but you really come up with an original idea, with your special approach, what you think about something. I think that makes a good or really excellent essay. Yeah. Yes, I see the point. Introductions are, I think, very tricky parts of an essay or of a thesis. So often they are, as we all know, they are mostly written at the end of your work. But nevertheless, I think a good introduction should be rather clear in the content, in the topic you want to deal with. You should come up with a problem that should be really transparent very early, I think, in the introduction. I do not really like introductions, which I wrote many myself in that kind, by the way, but I do not really like introductions who start with many facts and a long history of what happened before actually your problem starts. No, just come up with a clear question, name the problem, and come up with a provocative hypothesis or whatever. I think that's make it interesting. Memorable. Yeah, what makes a conclusion memorable? Good question. First of all, I like essays where you see a kind of connection, of course, between the introduction we just talked about and the conclusion or the summary. So obviously you start your conclusion with trying to answer your main questions you came up with in the beginning. And you should avoid to repeat all details, all facts. Just come up with what is really interesting, what are your main points. And you also can come up with questions you are not able to answer in your essay, in your article. You just say, well, another question which is absolutely fascinating, important in that context would be, but unfortunately this is already beyond the possibilities, the frame of this special essay, but at least I think, yeah. And try to make clear what your approach in this essay was. What is different to what we already all know to relating a certain topic or problem. Well, I think we all make the same problems and repeat them. It's interesting, even if you read books, I think there are many problems. So probably it makes sense to consider it and to think about it and to start to problematize it as a student. And I think one probably typical mistake, if you want to say, is that you quote too long, that you paraphrase the opinion of others, yeah, for very long. Try to be more abstract, try to be more analytical. You can say on 2 pages, you can summarize the opinion or an article of somebody else, of a well-known historian or research or whatever. But you also can do it in 2 or 3 sentences. And I think every reader would recognize, would appreciate it if it's to the point. And do, of course, avoid to hide your own opinion. I think make clear where your point, your perspective is. I think make your essay as transparent as possible. Lead your reader from the first paragraph to the end, and make him clear why you just come up with a certain example, with arguments and so on, and do not just tell a story which nobody really understands why you present it for what it is good. And so I think that's quite often not really clear to me when I read an essay. What's the matter? Why is it for? Why he or she comes with that argument, with that example? Make that clear and try to have a convincing overall argumentation and then I think many different things are possible. And avoid long quotations. And if you quote from your sources and not from research literature, just mention where it is from and we can have a look ourselves, but don't make too long quotations. I think that's boring. Yeah, that's a good question again. And I think there's probably no one easy answer to this question. May I give an example to this, if you like? So one of my last seminars I taught last term, winter term, was on bazaars and markets as places of trade and cultural encounter. And we discussed several different types of markets, different times where those markets took place, different cultures where they were embedded in. So you can guess that there are many chances to find sources. So it depends what are you interested in. So I ask a student, what are you most interested in? So, and they came up with their home city. Like one student wrote a great essay on Seoul in Korea. And she found interesting sources in newspapers, maps, photographs. Be creative. Generally, everything could be a source. All depends on your approach, on your question, what you want to tell. But it should fit together. You should think, if you want to tell a story about everyday life in history, you should use sources from the people on the streets, from the sellers on the bazaars. If you want to tell the story of the policy of the city administration, you should look at archives or at official newspapers or whatever you want. So I think it's fun to look for sources. I like it because this is real creativity in academic writing. Christian, I think students are very different, as we all are very different. So some of the students already have their ideas during the seminar. They develop them probably from their talk, from their presentation, or they are more interested in a certain aspect of the topic. And then they consult you, you talk with each other and think about, well, do you think there's any material I could rely on, and so topics are developing. I think really important is your own interest. Take a broader field and think about, let's say again, this example of bazaars or markets. You are interested in the relation of, let's say, the city administration and the little sellers or traders on the bazaar. So what can you learn from it? Yeah, and then you start to think, okay, which city I'm interested in, where bring your expertise in. Yeah, if you have dealt so far with Russian history, come up with an example from a Russian city. If you have dealt so far with Indian history or whatever, bring an example from India. So I think, again, to be creative in the frames of what you have learned. And a seminar should give you inspiration, and you should learn methodological approaches, yeah, to work critically with sources, and then you're very free to find a topic. And I see myself more like a guide who gives some ideas, some input, and many students come up with brilliant ideas. Yeah, yeah. It's often fun to read. Well, yeah, I think, yes, of course. There should be differences between a student essay and a published article. It pops to my mind that it might be comparable with the difference of if you take a piano player, for example. Yeah? He plays very well exercises at home at his piano, or with his teacher, or for a group of colleagues and students, and he's recording a concert or a music recording of a piece for a disc, for broadcasting, whatever. I think this is the difference. So once you look to train your technique, to train your methods, yeah, to sharpen your skills, but when you want to publish an article in a journal, it should somehow represent the state of the art. It should be something new, a new idea, a new approach. This is not necessarily for an essay the case. So I think yes, probably the degree of professionalism or whatever. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I should make a difference. Good, yeah, good question. Which I speak and which I read, because as a historian, actually there are some working languages which I do not properly speak. Well, I speak besides my mother or native language, German, English, and Russian, and I read in Czech, Polish, Yiddish, French, yeah, and one or two other languages, more or less. So yeah, but of course that's a big difference. So in Russia, where I work a lot, I can talk to the people and in the archives and so on. I think it's important. Yeah, while in Poland I have to try to to deal with other languages, and I try them with my dictionary to read the sources, but still it's possible. Yeah. Well, I think I cannot say a percentage, but what is interesting, I started to write basically in English in 2008, and exactly that was the date when I started my my job or my project here at the cluster in Heidelberg. So of course that is in a way interrelated, and since 2008 I think more than 80% of my articles or edited volumes are in English, and before almost all was in German. So yeah, that changed quite significantly, yes. Mm. Yeah, many things. Many things are difficult if you write not in your native language. So where to start and where to finish, oh my God. The start, first of all, was extremely difficult. I was not sure I really can make it. I mean, like a good article, like sometimes it happens that you are more or less happy with one of your articles in your mother or your native language, and then you should do it in another. So you are unsure, is this really what you want to express? So it's a question of your language skills first of all. But there are more problems, not just like the language ability or to talk or to write in a language. I think it's like things like style, or like even academic traditions are different. So, for example, I started being quite German, I mean in this academic sense, so bringing extremely long notes and complicated sentences. So I think my first articles are heavy to read because of the long sentences structures, and now I try to make shorter sentences. I try to come to the point earlier. Also, I think some of my articles have longer parts on theory, and now I think at least some journals in the US or in Great Britain are not really extremely happy with that, so I make it a bit shorter. And I myself think it's not necessary to have it long if you know what you're talking about. So I think this sort of academic approach is different as well. So yeah, but in general there are many things which are challenging, let's say that. Yeah, and I think that never will end, of course. Yeah, what do I enjoy in writing English? I think, first of all, it's easier for me to find a title in English. So something like, I don't know why, but in fact I have better ideas for English titles, like for an article or whatever, than for a German one. It sounds always very dry and serious in German, and sometimes in English I start to play with words even more than in German. So this is something I really enjoy. The other thing is, if your working language is English, if most of the materials you read are in English, it sometimes is easier to use the same terminology. Yeah. And before, it was often the case that somehow I switched between my, let's say, Russian and Yiddish or other sources and the English research literature and the final German text. So now this is a bit more easy, yeah, to be in the same area, in the same field, yeah, sometimes. And it also, I think, in the beginning I was quite unsure, and I really would prefer to have a text translated rather than write it myself. And now I really enjoy to develop the text itself from the original idea. Normally you have a talk in the beginning, let's say like 5-10 pages, and then you start to develop it. Of course it needs a copy editor, a careful reading afterwards, but anyway, yeah, it's to play with the language itself, that's a nice point. But yeah, difficult as well, and takes a lot of time. Time consuming pleasure. Yeah, I think it is a different world. I mean, first of all, there are different criteria. I mentioned already that, for example, the way of expressing your thoughts, the style, academic style is different. Also, you should somehow catch the interest of the reader much more than it is usual in a German history journal, for example, I think. And it's good to learn it. I mean, I like it. That's sometimes a really good point. And the other thing is probably the way to get an article published. So how you should send in first probably a proposal, then the whole article, then it's going to be reviewed at least by 2 people, then you get a feedback, then you rewrite or rework your article, and hopefully you get your article accepted, and the article is sometimes getting better. Should I give an example? Yeah, to this? I have written recently or published one article. It's called "The Chicago of the East," and this is on strange people, an article on strange people like adventurers, shady characters, and criminals in the cosmopolitan city of Manchuria, Harbin. And if you would compare my first ready article, which I submitted to the editor, with what has gone published, you wouldn't think that's the same article, yeah, because it changed many times, and sometimes I got really exhausted and said, oh my God, I mean, what do they want? What else do they want me to change or so on? But finally, I think I'm happy how it changed, and longer parts I spared out, and others I edited. So I think it's a very dynamic process, and it could be creative. Yeah.
Maybe related to that, just off the top of my head, I think, how important then do you think is rewriting when you've got a first draft, then you go into rewriting? How important is that for you?
Extremely important. Yeah. Actually, I do it quite often, and I think these are the final 10–20% which makes the difference between a good and a very good article, hopefully. I don't know. Yes, I think then you really try to focus on your argument again. And it's also good to have some distance. You wrote your article 1 year ago, then it comes back from the peer review process. They ask you to make some changes, you do it, and you read your own article, and you have a different relationship to it. You look different at it, because it is like something to eat, like a good wine. Yeah? So it's somewhere in the cellar for 2 years, and somehow you rework it, and sometimes I like that process. I think it's creative, and of course it should come to an end, I know, but I think normally we should write probably less, yeah, better 2–3 excellent articles per year or in 2 years than 10 mediocre articles, yeah, who nobody really enjoys, but just you have them, yeah. So probably it would make academia more interesting, more appealing, more inspiring, yeah, if you really would have good ones. So I would like to work on this, and I try this also to communicate to my students that yeah, it's fun to work for a longer time on a project, and yeah, finally to get it published, and probably to be happy with the way it looks.